Hello and welcome to season 5, episode 6 of Dualistic Unity. I am very curious to see where this episode goes because I have some thoughts in mind and they are almost 0% fleshed out, but we're gonna dig into some of them and see where they go. And that's the fun of this, is that kind of put a quarter in, see what comes out mentality is way more exciting than trying to fucking pre-plan everything. And that's one of the beauties of this podcast is we don't pre-plan shit. So it's always as exciting for us to find out what comes out as it is for you to find out what this episode is going to be all about. So I'm looking forward to finding out with you.
Because that really is the point of the podcast, isn't it? It's not about the subject matter necessarily. It's not even about the high-minded conceptualism. It's not about the insights. It's not about any of that. It's about how authentic you and I are in communicating whatever it is we're experiencing and what we're getting out of that experience and what we're willing to look at from that experience. And that's really all it is. If somebody is listening to this, it's more than likely not just for what we're saying, but for the fact that we're saying it from a place that is, I would hope, authentically curious, enthusiastic, and willingly uncertain. And it's just because we all kind of want to feel a little bit more of that. We all want to be able to go into uncertainty, which we want to be able to recognize as the case, right? Because false certainty creates all kinds of consequences. And so we want to be able to walk into uncertainty. We want to be able to know that we can just let go, say whatever it is we're going to say, do whatever it is we're going to do, and not second guess each and every step of the way. And so if the podcast is anything, it's an exercise for us in doing that for your entertainment. So you can do whatever you want with it. You can take it as an example. You can take it as a reason to laugh at our attempts, because why not? We're laughing. You can take it to be whatever you want. But ultimately, it should be just reminding you that you're exactly what you need to be. Speak, express yourself. Don't doubt yourself. You're just costing us all of what you are when you do that.
So I have some things I'm ready to kick off with this all right, I've been thinking just about all this stuff and the conversations that we've had and how much early on in the podcast it was me having a lot of questions. And it's not to say that I don't anymore, and I've expressed this before, but it's like in terms of what's going on in reality, there's like a understanding while simultaneously recognizing that there's so much more, and we've worked through so much. So it's like I have tons of questions, but I don't know what they are exactly. Like I know there's so many and there's so much to what the fuck is happening here. But at the same time, it's like the recognition that it's all me is there. And so it's I don't know, it's kind of been interesting to see that, but at the same time understanding, I think with that, and especially recently, despite recognizing that it's all me, there's still a lot of work to break down the idea of me, but simultaneously no work at all because it's not work. And the other thing that hit me was, with going through certain feelings, and I've talked about this in the raw episodes in the last week, but going through certain feelings, when I was younger, 15, 16, 17, and how I had this idea that I kind of maintained this idea that I overcame that stuff over the years. And it hit me like that I didn't like at all, like even a little bit. And again, this is just another fucking thought inside of my head. So it's not to say that it didn't happen, but it was also with the idea that you overcome something, there's the idea of progress. And it's as if I haven't made any progress at all, but not in the sense of me being self-deprecating by any means, but in the sense that I've always been me here now. And so there's a story I can look at and be like, oh, well, I was a little more tense then, I'm a little more relaxed now. I was a little more stressed then, I'm a little more, accepting of what's going on. But I haven't changed. The reality of what I am hasn't changed at all. And so the reality of what I am hasn't made any quote unquote progress. It's just been chipping away at the conceptual idea, which there still is a lot of, in a sense. And I see Ray making so many faces right now. So I'm very curious what he's going to get into after I'm done talking. But that idea of progress, like, it made me feel better for a while. Like, the whole idea of looking back at your stuff and, hey, give yourself a pat on the back. And I've always been very hesitant to do that. And again, it's not to say that there hasn't been changes that have been made, but it's not this sort of objective, positive trendline trajectory. It's still even baseline when it comes to the reality. It's just the conceptual has shifted, and not even shifted. It's just the conceptual has been chipped away at. And so that's some things I've been thinking about today and over the past week or two, and just reflecting on everything that's been going on in my experience and perception. And then, at the same time with all of that, it's like clarity is, getting glimpses of clarity along the way, but it's doesn't feel the same as it did before. Like, there's the recognition of the ground, whereas before I wasn't willing to look at the ground or something like that. I don't know. That's the best way I can put it for now. So I'm gonna pass it back over right now.
Wow, so many things. Okay. I think one of the problems that we tend to have is that we get locked in this idea of ourself. And we've talked about that many times. But what I mean by that is even that you think that you are an object, and that object is moving about inside reality rather than reality moving through the object. That reality itself, all of the universe, is in fact you, but it's focused itself through you for the experience of being you. And so when you look back at your teenage years and you think of the things that you overcame, we're just going to say that you did do so at the moment for the sake of this argument. What is it that you overcame? Aside from your conviction that you didn't have enough value or potential to move forward. It's just your doubt. It's just you restraining and restricting yourself that you overcame. Right? And we look at that as letting go of other people's perceptions, but it really is letting go of the importance that we give other people's perceptions. Right? That we are letting go of our self-imposed limitations, of our self-imposed prison. And so that's what we mean by overcoming. And so it's not overcoming those moments, those situations, those things that happened to you. It's overcoming why it was so fucking difficult. It's overcoming the things that were making it so challenging, that were causing that conflict. It's overcoming the need to hold on to them. And in that, you feel a little bit more of your potential. You feel a little bit more free. But when we say a little bit more free, what we mean is more aware of the considerations and more willing to make a choice that is your own outside of those considerations. There's less influences that you're not willing to look at, right? And that's freedom at the end of the day. And so it's not that you haven't overcome these things. It's just that you're looking at it in a way that isn't quite accurate. You are a fountain of intelligence and potential all the time. And your idea of yourself is what restricts that. It's what bottlenecks it. So everything you're overcoming is the self-imposed bottleneck. You're not moving backwards. You're learning more about the fact that you don't have to restrict yourself. See, that's the thing. It's just we're not looking at the lesson the right way. What are we learning? We're learning that we don't have to limit our potential. We're learning that the idea of ourself isn't the case every time we, quote unquote, overcome our fears. Right? So it's very different in terms of what do we mean by progress. It's not that you're going anywhere. You are always here now. But how much are you reflecting the all of everything you are here and now? How much are you bottlenecking it, and are you learning not to do that? And that's all we mean by being yourself. That's it. So back to what you were saying earlier when you began, there are more questions now almost. But the difference is that you're not looking for a specific answer. You're not even sure what the questions are because it's everything. Everything is now a question of, oh, there's an assumption. Oh, that's not the truth. Oh, what is it then? Oh, there's another assumption. That's not the truth. And that's life from now on. And we've discussed that, and I've described it as unfolding. That's what you're doing. You are watching more of what you are, more of what's within you, more of what insight is available to you, unfolding moment to moment to moment. And there is no end to that for the rest of your existence. There will be nothing but questions. The nice part is you will have no need or desire to settle on an answer.
Yeah, because we think for the most part that getting to an answer means something about us, means something about the idea of me. And if I can get to an answer, a better answer or a faster answer or more efficient answer, then I am more. And so when you realize that there's no way for that to change, because when you understand the reality of what you are, you know that your value doesn't fluctuate at all. So it's not even about getting to an answer. And as you were talking through that, like it's just the continued process of working through shit, letting go of assumptions over and over and over. And a part of me is like, that's not satisfying, though. It's not that satisfactory endpoint of like, I got it. It's it. That's it. I'm done. I'm done. Because that's not it. That's not life. That's not reality. There is no point in reality where that ever happens. Like it's off the table, kind of. It's not even a consideration. It's like you're looking at it from a completely different point of view. It's no longer about what's the meaning of life? What's the point of life? What's the point of me? How quick can I get to this answer or that answer or this answer or that answer? It's a completely different ball game almost. Like until you recognize that getting to an answer doesn't mean anything about you, you're going to keep trying to get to an answer because that's the ultimate me. I am valuable as fuck and more valuable than everyone else because I get it and they don't. And it's like the peak of ego in a sense, the desire to know what this all is and to be able to conceptually box it up, because knowing what it is isn't a conceptual idea. But as long as you think it could be, you're going to strive for that into the ether, into just nowhere. Like there isn't some point to get to in which that is satisfactory ever. And so when you do realize that and understand that it's not about getting to an endpoint, like reality is just you unfolding, you start to get a feel for that process of unfolding, and you appreciate the things that come up, whether it's an enjoyable component of the process or a fucking shitty fucking part of the process. It's you in process finding out more and more of what you're capable of. Like you can't find out what you're capable of if you don't go through shit. If it's all comfortable all the time, there's no opportunity to realize, oh, this is something, I'm capable of more than what I thought. But we want to get to a spot, and a lot of people do get to a spot where they're comfortable enough and they stop unfolding. They stop finding out what they're capable of because they've set a cap and they're like, all right, I'm capable of this. This is what I am. I'm gonna, be comfortable for the rest of my life. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it's kind of like throwing in the towel in a sense. And eventually you kind of stagnate in that spot if you're not willing to continue digging in. And eventually you dig in enough to reality and you get to yourself and start digging into that. And a lot of people don't ever want to get to that point of questioning themselves at all. They'll question everything about reality, but not me. Oh, I'm this. I'm someone who questions reality. I'm a curious person. And they settle, I'm an open-minded person. I'm a good parent. Whatever it is that they identify as, and they're comfortable in that spot. And then it's like they set a limit on themselves. And that's how much freedom they experience, because it's how much freedom they, I don't know. Part of me wants to say it's like how much freedom they think they deserve, but it's not that, because it's not a deserve, but it kind of goes hand in hand with the throwing in the towel. Like, you're gonna settle upon the spot that you perceive yourself to be capable of getting to, because it's where you settle. Like, it's kind of by design plays out like that. But it's interesting to see it play out, and I'm more curious than ever where that process plays out, and whatever it is I've been feeling the last couple weeks. Like, I'm almost more just curious about how that's going to inform all the other insights that I go through over the next year and, 70 years.
It's really interesting. We were talking about a fountain of potential and insight, and each of us are exactly that in the here and now. That's what we are. We are change embodied, and how much we allow ourselves to just be is how fluid we become, and how much alignment we're able to achieve, or rather recognize and become sensitive to from moment to moment to moment. But you could easily take that and expand that out and turn each of these fountains that is you and I and everybody else that is everything, and turn them into a drop, and then envision them in a larger fountain. And that larger fountain also has the capacity to be limited in its flow. And so all of these drops are coming out, but they're only expanding a certain distance from their source, as it were. And it's because of that bottleneck. And so collectively, you can actually see where we're all settling. You can see that it's on the mentality that values politics and economics and war and control and media and distraction and entertainment. It values the narrative and identity over reality. And that is all of our collective bottlenecks individually. And as each of us let go of the bottlenecks individually and let go of more of that mentality and mature and grow up and understand that our ego is not the all of everything, that in fact it's just here to inform us, not be our prison, then our collective bottleneck in this giant fountain also opens a bit. And all of a sudden, a few of these drops are landing a little farther from the rest. And it's because they're able to. They can generate that much energy, that much potential, just by virtue of not being in the way. And before you know it, the fountain starts to grow. And that's what we're doing. We are collectively and individually a fountain of potential and intelligence, little ones and big ones together. And the world is being watered by this. And we've just restricted the flow for so very long out of fear that the garden is drying up. That's all it is. And as soon as we manage to let go a little bit in ourselves, the flow increases. And that flow is ultimately just us, the all and everything of us, without fear of allowing that to express. And then we get to see what happens with that. But that said, that changes the path. That changes what it is we're doing here. It's not about trying to get somewhere in life anymore. Now it's about, and we talk about unfolding, but we've also talked about mastering flow state, which is really the same thing. You can say master unfolding if you'd like to, but that just means feeling it happen, recognizing it happen, aligning with it as it happens, being sensitive to it as it happens. And by it, I mean you, right? And so now it's not a matter of where are we going? How do we get there? What does it mean about me? Now it's a matter of how much distortion am I adding to the reaction or the action that I'm having in this moment here. It's just like trying to tune an old analog radio, right? You got to go back and forth with the dial before you can find the signal. Well, most of us have just stopped. Like, it's like we found a station that's almost clear. It's a little staticky, and we're just like, it's good enough. Fuck it. We'll just listen to it. And that's what we've done. Whereas, collectively, we didn't have to stop doing that. We didn't have to stop looking for the signal. We didn't have to stop going back and forth until we found it. It's just that we became afraid that we'd never find it.
I like that one a lot. Yeah, because that's like when you turn in the dial, like static, a little clear, not quite clear, and it's got to be like right on the perfect spot. And if you're getting sick and tired of it, you'll settle upon that. And you're like, oh, it's good enough. And it's like, it's pretty clear, but it definitely could be clear. And you know exactly what that's like. I think everyone has experienced something like that where, or even, there's times with when I put a contact in and it's like, there's a little thing and it's like, I could ride this out, but there's definitely something in here. And sometimes I'm just like, fuck it, I'm going to go with it. But other times I'm like, we're going to figure this out. And sometimes it's something in my eye, sometimes it's something on the contact, but it's that. And it's you can tell when it's same on the radio station when it's like, it's station like when I grew up with, it was 101.3. It's like it's on 101.4. You can still hear the music. Or if you're outside the city, like an hour and a half, it's like you can still hear that station, but it's like it's not that crystal clear thing that you're used to. And so with the discussion of the flow and whatnot, because this is something we've talked about plenty of times, is that we're always in flow. Like we're not in flow, we are the flow, and it's always the case. And so it's just about like how little weight you add to the flow that's already happening, that's always happening. And anytime we maintain an idea of what we think the flow should be, is adding weight. That's what it is. Anytime we think something should be happening as opposed to just paying attention to what is happening and finding out and like actually finding out what's happening. Yeah, it constricts, it adds weight, it hinders that flow from expanding. And the more relaxed you are, it's like just with tension. Like, if a hose, like you were saying earlier today, with the kink in the hose, it's like that's going to create a lot of pressure, a lot of tension. Whereas if it relaxes enough to the point that even, you could even take it as far as with a hose, like if a hose were to relax to the point that a hose could, like to the extreme over years and years and years, like it actually starts disintegrating. And then it's not really this stream anymore. And it's just coming out of the faucet in a much wider capacity. And then, you take that far enough, the house starts breaking down because it's just relaxing so much. And just, bear with me. I don't really know where this is going, but, the house breaks down. And all of a sudden, that little faucet it was coming out of on the side of your house busts open and it's a larger stream. And then, the fucking ground breaks open or whatever pipe it's coming from that's a little wider, that busts open. And it's just this continued process of relaxation. But we get caught in thinking we're the hose and we have to control exactly where it's going and if there's enough or not enough. And meanwhile, it's like there's all this shit back there coming from originally a river or a dam or the ocean, goes into water towers, into the pipes, into the house, into the faucet, into the spout, into the hose. It's like we're that hose thinking that we're in control of the flow and we have this entire flow behind us. And like, we relax through the hose, notice the flow open up a little bit more. And we don't understand that there's still so much more. And I think that's a component of it. Like we like just with me, for example, recognizing that the story that I told myself for a very long time isn't the reality of what I am. And you can get caught in that. And I think I may have gotten, I don't know, I say caught, but it's just like would have stayed in that spot if dualistic unity hadn't come around and, I hadn't been talking about it and talking through stuff all the time. I may have been good with recognizing that I'm not the hose, but not realizing there's still so much more behind that. And all the other spouts come out of all the other houses are all coming from the same spot. And the more deeply you relax, the more deeply you recognize, oh, that entire flow is coming from the same exact spot. Oh, that spot is actually what I am. And so it's just, but it's not getting to the spot of recognizing. It's relaxing in the spot that you're in, no matter what life is throwing at you. no matter what is happening, if you can reduce the concern that's causing all of the tension and just relax through it. And even if you're concerned, reduce your concern about your concern, whatever spot that you're in. It's like if you can relax through wherever you're at, that opens it up more and more and more and more. And so it's not about like looking back and recognizing, oh, it's all coming from the ocean. Oh, that's what I am. Oh, I get it. While you're still, constricting the hose and getting all tense about it. It's about seeing it. It's about allowing the process to play out and then being that the whole time. But you can't be the ocean before you recognize that you're not the hose, before you recognize that you're not the faucet, before you recognize that you're not the pipes, before you recognize that you're not the water tower. And it's like, that is how it plays out, but it's not getting to the spot. It's relaxing through the spot that you're in that allows you to be that, because it's always that.
And isn't it interesting? It's in trying to be something that we limit ourselves to thinking that we're just the hose. One thing at a time. First, we were the water tower, then we were the house, then we were the hose, right? And we're trying to become something. We're trying to become something specific, something that has a purpose, something that has value. But we started as the fucking ocean. We just don't remember that. That said, I want to say something quickly before we carry on. Dualistic unity had nothing to do with how far you've come. If anything, dualistic unity is here because of how far you've come. Fact is that you could have never met me, Andrew, and you would still be having this conversation with somebody who looks totally different and is equally you. The only difference is whether or not they'd be willing while you're having this conversation, I'm pretty sure. But I just want you to know, like, there is nothing I could have done to make you as willing to see everything as you are. It was already there. It's just a matter of letting it unfold. And I'm grateful to be here as it does, but it has nothing to do with me because I'm just you. So it has everything to do with me. You know what I'm saying? That said, when we're talking about the flow, we are talking about universal intelligence. We are actually talking about what we are before we get in there with our preferences and our fears. And so what we do is no longer a matter of doing the right thing, because whatever we're doing is the result of the flow that we are. It's our perception of it that is adding the distortion. It's our perception of it that comes from our identity, from our fear and our need and our desire. And so that said, if it's not about what you're doing, it's about your alignment with what you're doing as what is happening. So now it's not about doing the right thing. It's about allowing yourself to feel the timing that is already happening, that is happening through you, in fact. And so it's interesting because playing video games, this is something that a lot of people will notice when they're really intent on a part of the video game where the timing is very, very specific. And that timing always ends up working out when you're quote unquote in the zone, which means that you're not too early because you're afraid, and you're not too late. And that's it. You're just in the zone. You're in the flow. And that is very much what we're doing all the time. What's our timing? Because the timing is already perfect. It's our perception that throws off our response to that timing because we can't see it. We're disconnected from it. We're not the universe that we're experiencing, right? So we're not a part of the clock as it ticks along. And yet, of course, we are. It's just that out of our fear, we will try and speed up the mechanism or slow it down. It's happening too fast for me. Quick, I got to get there. And that's what throws off the intelligence that we would otherwise be embodying. And that is the power of faith, is that it allows that fountain of potential, that fountain of intelligence, that flow to do what it would do otherwise if you weren't in the way freaking out.
And that's where the judgments come in, is when things are happening in a certain way. And it's always like, and just for whatever reason, it's the experiences I had, especially in college, on edibles. And I always had this idea of I'm too high. Like, I'm too high right now. And it's like, just that idea of being too high, it's a relative perception. And it's a judgment of a situation that's happening that otherwise would just be allowed to happen. And back then I didn't really understand anything about resistance and how futile all of that is, and just letting go of my opinion of a situation, letting go of my judgment. Like there was none of that whatsoever. Like someone could have explained all of that to me at any point, and I was like, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. Like there was a 0% recognition, and I know maybe I'm discounting some of that to a degree because it was still in there at the time, but it wasn't as recognized as maybe it is now. And so we're always going through things all the time. Like there's always shit on our plate. There's always shit that we're going through. There's always shit happening. And it's almost just like how little of a judgment can you have about it? How little of an objective judgment, as opposed to just, it's like, this is tough. Like recognition versus judgment sort of thing. And so as you go through things, you're just going through things, and there isn't the thought of, I mean, there certainly can be, and it comes up for me all the time of, why is this happening to me? Like, why is this going on? But it's not about that. It's not about, oh, this is my lot in life, fucking overcoming some past karma or some bullshit like that. It's what you're going through, and how aligned can you be with it? Because there's also, I don't want to say reward, but kind of reward to not having such a strong judgment about it, because that's going to distort it, because it's not your judgment. It's not your idea of it. It never, ever is. So anytime you think that that's what it is, it distorts it to the point that you're no longer even seeing what's happening. You're no longer seeing reality anymore. And so it's just maintaining the sight of reality, which is always just what is. Your opinion, your judgment, your perception is more or less irrelevant to what's actually happening in reality. And so without the judgment of it on any degree of whether it's your judgment and your judgment of your judgment and your judgment of your judgment of your judgment, if you drop that, if you understand that your judgment isn't it, you keep looking at reality, and you can keep interacting with reality. Like we're making it so much more difficult for ourselves by judging something. Just by judging it, we're making it more difficult to deal with, because we're not even seeing the thing anymore. We're not actually seeing even a strain of what's happening. We're seeing it through our distorted perspective that we believe to be the truth. So whatever you're going through, I'm not saying that it's not a tough thing to go through, because we're always going in and out of different experiences, but how well can you see what's actually happening? And how well you can see what's actually happening is going to be how well you can respond to what's actually happening. Because if you're not seeing what's happening, you're not going to be able to respond to what's happening. You're going to be responding to your perception of what's happening, which isn't what's happening, which is going to make it way more fucking difficult to respond to that thing and handle the thing. So it's really just almost easing your own experience, which is setting aside your judgment of it, your opinion of it, which doesn't change it, but it allows you to see it.
Yeah, if the music is distorted, it's very difficult to dance along to. And all of a sudden, we're just right out of whack. We're like, why is everybody not dancing like I am? It's like, because they can hear the music. And you're just trying to keep up and fit in, right? Rather than clearing the distortion. And that's very much the case. It's funny because the immediate image that I had is, we don't recognize that each and every perception that we hold on to as truth is essentially like putting on a set of VR goggles with a slightly different world than we're actually experiencing. So you're still kind of seeing the world, and like the walls are where they are and the ground is where it is. But instead of Jim asking you if you'd like a bagel, you're seeing somebody dressed as a ninja who wants to take your bagel. And that's not actually the case. It's just what you're perceiving. And so now you're interacting with poor Jim in an entirely different way, yelling at him about the bagel that he is not trying to take, but is trying to offer you, that you can't hear because you're panicking and you're afraid. And it really is just like that. Assumptions really do put a virtual world over the world that we would otherwise be experiencing. And so then we wonder, why am I experiencing so much conflict? Because you're not in the world. You're not interacting with it. You're interacting with assumptions, and nobody can help you there because nobody has the script. Nobody's in there with you. It's impossible. And yet we form expectations. Why aren't you catering to my narratives? It's like, we don't know them. It's impossible to do that. Maybe we can collect a few and kind of make some rules like, okay, well, these ones we can do something about. But there are so many. And the more you want to, the more you're going to have, right? That people must cater to. So that said, I wanted to address this question because it comes up a lot. And I know because I used to be the king of this question. Why? Why is this happening? And what's funny about that question is it implies that there's an answer that's going to be satisfying to you, or that there is someone, in fact, to answer the question. What's funny about that question is that it would be equally valid to ask, why not? Why shouldn't this be happening to you? And what you'll find is that your immediate answer is, because I don't like it. It's the only reason you're asking why. Preference. It really is. Hindsight is 2020. I love that expression because often the things we're like, why do I have to go through this? I hate this. I don't want to do it. And then all of a sudden, a year later, we look back and we're like, damn, I learned a lot from that shit. And isn't that funny? But we never allow ourselves to get there. We're too busy with all our opinions. We're too busy pissing and whining as we go through the experience rather than just getting it done. How much work would get done if you stopped bitching about it? How much of your life would just go by if you stopped resisting every fucking step that didn't match what you think should be the ideal? And then what's funny is that you would make the most out of the moments that you have, achieving what others might consider to be the ideal. And it's because you've let go of the ideal and thus become the ideal, which is awareness, responsible awareness, responsible, reasonable awareness. That's the best you can hope for, because in that you have choice. In that you have freedom, not certainty, but certainly freedom.
Because it's not about what's happening. It's about you and how you're responding to what's happening or how little distortion you have in regards to what's happening. And as much as our perception is a shade on the VR goggle, so is our preference as well, like a massive shade on that. And we hold on to those, despite them being fucking made up, despite them not actually being as solid as we think. Like we hold on to those preferences thinking that it's what we are. And they're kind of silly when you think about my favorite thing or my preference. It's like I sometimes have a tough time when someone's like, oh, what's your favorite food or something. Like I told the story a couple seasons ago when I was on a episode. It was this fitness guys podcast, and we were kind of going into some stuff. I was kind of like, I don't know, felt like the token mental health guest that he had on his fitness podcast. And at the end, he asked me what my basically what my favorite meal is. It's like if I was on death row, what would be my last meal or something like that. And I straight up like couldn't think of anything. I took like a few minutes and I was like, and then I just settled on something. And so it's funny, like how often that conversation comes up. Like, what's your favorite this? What's your favorite that? What's your opinion on that? And we say it as if it is something that exists. Like it's something that's very, very real. Like, oh, my favorite food is this. It's like, I don't know. I like it. Like if it's in front of me, I'll eat it. But you make me eat it 4 days in a row, I'll probably find a different favorite food. But we hold on to those like crazy. And you see it with people who go, they have their favorite restaurant and they just go to that every single day or every single week. And it's what they know. And it provides them with that false certainty or a degree of certainty. And they don't want to explore beyond that. And so they limit their potential. And what they don't realize is that, say, take favorite restaurant, for example, they don't realize there's a restaurant out there they could possibly like more. There's always that. And I'm not saying that that's why you should go explore, but it's kind of in there, right? Like if you haven't explored all of them, you can't aptly say what your favorite one is. It's like the question should be, what's your favorite one out of the things that you've tried? Or what's your favorite one out of the things that you've done? And that kind of shifts the question a little bit, because you got to think like, oh, well, so it's not really my favorite. It's just my favorite based on what I've experienced, which is super limited. And there's a lot of people out there who've probably experienced very little and they settle upon a favorite and then they just ride that out forever. And so, again, not to say there's anything wrong with that. It's like someone settling upon an assumption of themselves, an assumption of reality, and then building a course around that and saying this is the answer. It's like not really anything wrong with that, but there's going to be fucking consequences. It's not a right or a wrong thing. It's just how much distortion is there? How much are you keeping all of the recognitions at bay? And if you're settling to any degree upon something, you're keeping those recognitions at bay. And so coming to any answer is always hindering the potential recognitions that would exist beyond the settling upon that answer. And so it makes sense in our society with our desire for certainty at all times, that having your favorite things and having an opinion about everything. You know, I had a friend when I was younger, or it was actually a sister's ex-boyfriend, who was all about like, you should have an opinion about everything. You should be able to have an opinion on every single thing. If someone asks you about it, you should be able to say what your opinion is. It's like, it's such a silly way of existing, because it keeps everything else at bay. Like, it limits your potential to such a great degree when we sit on these things and hold on so dearly to them, because the alternative is letting go, stepping into uncertainty, and being free to continue to explore what our new favorite thing might be, or just explore our fucking potential.
Yeah, that's a really funny one. I know it's something I've run across a number of times, and somebody has asked me, what's your favorite food, or what's your favorite song, or what's your favorite movie? And my typical response is, I don't have favorites. And it's so interesting to watch that person get really uncomfortable, because all of a sudden, everything that they're unconsciously trying to do, which is basically to summarize me, is no longer possible. Because that's what they're asking. Not what are your favorites, but who are you? Where do you sit? How much have you limited yourself? How much do I have to be afraid of? How much can I settle on false certainty with you? It's one of the reasons that people always ask us, like, well, what spirituality is this? What philosophy is this? What author have you read? And it's just because they just want to pigeonhole you. The alternative to that is you being an unknown. And that makes us uncomfortable, despite the fact that that's when you actually see the person. Isn't it funny? Like, we want people to be authentic, but please classify yourself. Please put yourself in a prison where you are afraid to step outside, but be authentic. It's like, okay, I'll be authentically afraid, which means that I'm not going to tell you what I actually think at all, which means it's impossible for me to actually be authentic. Right? But that's the cornerstone of a good relationship. Is the cornerstone of us working together, is the ability to be authentic, which means to let go of our preferences, so that way we can see both sides of the fence. Otherwise, we argue with everybody who doesn't share our preferences. And so when we ask somebody, like, what's your favorite such and such, we're really asking, how limited is your fountain of potential? Is there a chance that I'm going to get sprayed? Or are you nice and safe in a small, easily controllable location where I don't have to worry about you suddenly just fountaining up with all this stuff that I didn't see coming? Right? I want to know who you are. I want to know how much impact you're going to have in my life. What's your favorite book, Andrew?
Exactly. And you can feel it play out, when someone asks you. Like, I remember at work when I first started, this was back in like after graduation, and it was like 2018. And after the first few months, like, some people told me, or like one of my friends told me, that people were saying how they couldn't figure me out. They couldn't figure out what I'm all about. And it's so funny to think that you can do that with anyone. Like, people actually think that it's possible to do. Like, they think it's actually a thing that could happen, is figure someone out. It's like, if you don't give someone that, someone asks what your favorite thing is, and you're like, oh, I don't have favorites, it forces them to sit on that. and to not make an assumption. And then they have to actually interact with you to find out. But even then, it's not something that they can settle upon. Oh, you're this type of person, or you're that type of person, as if that exists at all. But it does. Again, it makes sense that we try and do that. And it's just like, it's a fear response. Basically, it's being afraid of not knowing, of not feeling safe. It's like a safety mechanism to settle upon that. But the funniest part is that it works in exactly the opposite way, because we settle upon something and then we're like, oh, I'm safe. It's like that person is not the thing that you settled upon. So you settled upon something that only caused more distortion between you and the person. The safest thing you can ever do is remain uncertain. We've talked about this before, but like objective safety doesn't exist. So what's the best way to be safe? To continue to pay attention, just to be aware. If if you're walking across the street and you see the walk sign, it's like, okay, green light, I can walk. It's like you're like, I can definitely do that. I know I can definitely walk. So you don't even look, car runs a red light, bam, you're hit by a car and you're dead. Whereas if you were a little bit skeptical and aware, you see that green light, you're like, yeah, but that doesn't guarantee anything. And you maintain that awareness, you maintain that attention. And then you see the car, like that car's going pretty fast for having to stop in 15 feet. I'm going to stop walking, runs the red light, but you're fine. And so it's so funny how we settle upon ideas thinking that's what allows us to be safe, because it just allows us to be comfortable, but it doesn't mean safe. It's just, I feel a little bit better, but it actually takes us off our guard. And it's not to say that you have to stay on guard, but you just have to stay attentive. And once you get comfortable with staying attentive, it's like it makes way more sense because it's on you. You're taking responsibility for your experience, as opposed to passing that responsibility off to another person's description of themselves, another person's response about themselves, a fucking traffic light, a fucking anything outside of yourself. So remaining uncertain, continuing to pay attention, is just you remaining responsible for yourself and your experience, which is the best way to remain, quote unquote, safe.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting, right? Like, this is one of the reasons that, and I've said this before, I don't focus on my client's narrative. If somebody comes to me for one-on-one coaching or private chat, I don't go like, well, let's explore your childhood, shall we? Because the problem is here. The problem is your relationship with now as reality itself. Your problem is your disconnect from what you are and how much you're overcommitted to the idea of yourself. And so I don't focus on the narrative or the story. I focus on what you are, which means that I'm not looking at your past and making assumptions based on it. And this is one of the biggest problems with doing that, is that you can have two people, for example. Okay, here's a perfect example. You could have somebody who had my life and didn't wake up. You could have two people who go through childhood trauma. You have two people who go through abandonment. You can have two people who, on the surface, sound like they have gone through the same kind of things and make totally different choices. It's not the thing. It's not the event. It's the person here and now doing the best they can to adapt to here and now. And so if we're talking to people, it's about how we adapt to here and now, because this is the only thing we're doing all the time, is being here and now, whether we want to or not. This is something that Alan Watts said, and I thought it was quite good. God is what we all are, and no one wants to admit to being. And it's very much the case about being the present, because that is being God. We want to think that we are an object on a linear timeline on a planet that we are separate from, because frankly, that is easier. Then we can just focus on an end result. Otherwise, as you said, it's leaning into the process, aligning with the process, recognizing that you are the process. And in doing so, gaining more awareness of exactly how much process you are, because it's not just the character that you've told yourself you are.
Exactly. There's no one else to look to. There's no one else to look to for an answer. You can gain perspectives, Sure, you can have conversations to understand more things, but we look to other people for answers, for solutions, for things to know, to have, to be able to hold on to, and to think that that's going to be it. Like it's got to be through you. It's got to be through your experience and your willingness to just continue to find out. And because the reason that we run to people to find answers is because we are maintaining a perception of ourselves that isn't capable of doing so. And so we need the crutches, we need the assistance, we need all of the help. And that's just a distorted perspective of yourself. That's just something you're settling upon that is absolutely in question and has the potential to be in question if you're willing to do so. But with that, you have to be willing to let go of all of the false certainty that you're holding on to. And so we maintain the false certainty and settle upon that. And because of that, we think we must do other things. We must take other actions. We must look to other people because we're settling upon an assumption that we're then, standing on top of, like, this is all definitely true underneath me. All this shit about myself that I believe to be the truth based on very, very little evidence. And so because of that, I have to look to you and I have to find out, how to figure this thing out as opposed to looking down at the pile of shit that you're carrying with you all the time and being a little bit curious about that. Well, wait a second. Maybe this isn't exactly what I am. Maybe this isn't my actual limitations of things. And then that begins to fall away and you see that you have just as much potential to find out anything or understand anything or do anything as anyone else. Like everyone is starting with the same blank slate. Sure, there's genetic predisposed shit for certain things that we can do, and there's absolutely experiences that we go through. But if you're maintaining that, you're getting in the way of finding out what you're capable of. And so it's not about coming to the same conclusions as that person, but it's about recognizing that you're both coming from the same potential opportunity to come to the same recognitions. No matter where you start from, no matter what you've been through, the potential is always the same. And it's just how much you have in the way, how much you're holding on to that's keeping that potential at bay.
It's really interesting how things can change in terms of perception because it's not about telling yourself that you can do what everybody else can do. It's about reminding yourself that any of those people would do exactly as well as you're doing if they were you. That's it. It's not, we're all equal. Yeah, but we're in different forms. We have different functions. We have different experiences, different journeys. All of us have different challenges. It's not about being able to do the challenge of the other person because your challenges are different. Even if you are both to run the same race, it's a different goddamn journey to get to that race. It's a different journey that comes after that race. There are different steps that you are taking. They may look like similar journeys, but they never are. You are the all and everything that you need to get through the journey that is yours. If anybody else was in your shoes, this is the best that they could do too. So it's not about what are others doing. It's about what can you do with what you're doing? How much can you make of the experience you're having? And how much have you settled on an idea that you can't change it? That you can't, in fact, align with it, that there isn't more to see. That's really it. It's not about not having suffering. It's about what can you do with that suffering? What have you learned from that suffering? Have you turned that suffering into something else? Or are you just sitting there taking it?
And it kind of reminds me of the example we were talking about last week with not being above the ground, people higher than others. It's like everyone's underwater, holding themselves down to a degree with all of the weight and all of the perceptions that they're holding on to that's sinking them. And even another potential component of that example that I was thinking of is it's like, those jets that we hold on to underwater, or that people, I've never done it before, but like they can hold on to it and kind of like fly under the water around and shit. And it's like some people have those and they're looking at it in a way because they've settled upon an assumption of how it works that's actually pointing down, and they don't realize that they can flip it around, look at it a little bit differently, and it can actually help accelerate you towards the surface. And that's, I think, it with the suffering that we experience, the lot in life that we're given. Some people have more forceful fucking things that they're working with, and it can be tough to handle. And maybe one that's a little bit more powerful has the potential both to rise to the surface very quickly and also plummet to the bottom very quickly. And some people have ones that aren't as forceful, so they're not sinking them as much, but they don't raise them up as much when they figure out how it's working and the potential. So someone who's experienced a fuckload of suffering in their life has a fuckload of potential energy in order to skyrocket them to the surface of the ocean. Someone who hasn't as much maybe doesn't have as much potential energy, but it's still the same overarching potential to get there. It's just dependent upon the lot that you're given, the cards that you're dealt. Changes and shifts everything about it, but it really depends on how you're looking at it. Because if you've been through a fuckload of shit, you have a fuckload of shit to pull from. If you've been through not so much shit, you don't have as much shit to pull from. And so maybe you're not as far from the surface, but it's not the same sort of potential in that. And so I think there's just a number of ways to reframe the things that we've been through and the experiences that we've had, but it comes down to you. It comes down to your willingness to look at that shit and recognize that it actually doesn't mean anything about the reality of what you are, but it's still something you can pull from. Like the story is still something you can utilize. And then you start seeing the story and the fullness of it and the depth of it as a potential toolbox with a fuckload of tools to pull from. It's just how willing are you to recognize that you can actually use the tools instead of lugging around a heavy fucking toolbox without looking inside of it. So you think it's just a fucking heavy metal box as opposed to something that you can use to fulfill your life, utilize in your life, use to help and interact with everyone you will ever interact with, and start utilizing the box instead of just allowing it to continue to weigh you down.
And that's it. It's looking at all of the perceptions that you've held on to that are limiting the flow of your potential, and then asking yourself if they need to, if that is in fact the only function that they can have, because we did a lot of that when we were young and we didn't know any better. And so a good example off the top of my head would be, at one point I looked at everybody who had ever hurt me as a justification to protect myself, to give into my own fear, to cater to it, to cope with it, to nurture it, hold on to it, and make it a part of my reality. Now I can look back and question those situations, those experiences, and recognize that the people who had hurt me were doing so from a state of mind that couldn't see me. And so all of a sudden now I can learn about my own fear and how much it can blind me from the destruction that I can create around me. And so now it's become a way for me to let more of my potential out rather than a way for me to limit it. It's just about willingness.
Exactly. And it comes down to you and your perspective and your willingness to look at it, your willingness to let go of the blame on everyone else and everything else. And yeah, because all of those things that you're blaming, all of those things that you've been through, all of those other people aren't what you are and where you're at here and now. And that's the only thing you've ever been and the only thing you've ever are gonna be. And so unless you're willing to take that responsibility, it's going to continue to be a weight. But when you start coming closer to the recognition of what you actually are, those things change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, that whole cliche thing. But it's applicable, because the thing that you're holding on to, the perception that you're holding on to, the opinion of the situation that you're holding on to isn't the situation. It's not the reality of it. And that can be a tough one to swallow, especially when it was a brutal situation. But even with that, your perception of it isn't it. And then it causes you to have to sit in it and see it from at least a slightly different point of view, which changes everything that was built on top of that, all the assumptions that were built on top of that original opinion, judgment of a situation, of a person, of a thing that happened. And then it changes you. And then you see everything differently. And then you're actually able to utilize it as opposed to it continuing to weigh you down.
But do remember not to beat yourself up for settling on things, not to look back and go, oh, I've made so many mistakes. That's just you adding more to the narrative. In fact, you are where you are right now, and there's nothing but potential moving forward. It's really important to recognize that. And I would like to reiterate here before we do wrap up this episode, as I imagine we're going to do in the next little while. If you have an idea of this conversation, if you think you should be believing that we're all one, or that you should be repeating to yourself thoughts aren't reality and all of that, and you are turning this into a concept whether you mean to or not, and again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's kind of part of the process. I can't encourage you enough to come and meet Andrew and I in person, because in person we are happy to destroy any illusions that you might have. We are happy to frustrate and disappoint you, so that way you can get a little bit closer to seeing who we are by seeing who you are, which is what frustration is kind of good for. You really get to see where you're rubbing up against reality, and we're happy to be there for you, good natured, of course. But if you can make it to a retreat or any live event that we do, it really does break down the concept. And if you can't do that, connect with the rest of the community. Just keep doing what you're doing. There are a lot of people who are going through this. It's a lot. It's a big journey. It's not like you can go through a lifetime of forming concepts, believing in concepts, and then just go, oh yeah, that's all bullshit, and be perfectly okay with the uncertainty. There's a big, big journey to all of this, but it's a journey to recognizing that you're only here now. So just relax, pay attention, be yourself, and everything else will just unfold, because everything else is just you.
Exactly. Because I can almost guarantee that if you're maintaining any idea of us having this conversation, thinking about us in any way, shape, or form, it ain't it. That's not us, because it never is. So it's not an almost guarantee. It's a fucking guarantee that whatever idea you're holding on to, and it's probably not even close, honestly. It's probably not even close. And for anyone who's met us in person, you may realize that we love having this conversation. We love having the podcast, but there is nothing about us that is that special by any means whatsoever. It's funny to me when people have any idea of anything. Like, there's been a number who, especially after the last retreat, were like, I thought you didn't really suffer that much anymore. It's like, oh, you had that shit wrong. So it's important with everything, not the least of which being your idea of yourself, to be willing to question, to be willing to understand that the idea that you're holding on to is not you. The idea that you're holding on to of us is not us. The idea you're holding on to of your parents or your friends, or your siblings or your children are not them. And they never, ever, ever, ever will be. They are what they are, here and now. That's not what you think.
And it helps to remember that the entire reason that you believe other people can be figured out is because you haven't let go of the belief that you can be figured out. Because that's it. You never can be. There is no ending concept that's going to wrap up everything that you are, ever. And you wouldn't want there to be. That's the whole point. Your life is nothing but limitless possibility if you just get out of the way and allow it to be. Just be the fountain of potential that you are. You're already it. It's just that you're afraid of how much you can do. You don't need to be afraid.
And with that, I think this is a great spot to wrap this episode up. I had no fucking idea where it was going to go, but and I still don't even know really where it went, but it was fun for sure. So I appreciate everyone for tuning in. Keep in mind, we have some retreats coming up. Those announcements come out on Patreon. So if you're not with us there, join us. The groups are fucking incredible. They're always very therapeutic. I know people talk about, but for me as well, they're a great time to just be able to chat with people who are going through stuff no differently than what you're going through. So I appreciate everyone for tuning in to this one, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, on a quick note, just a reminder that the retreats are probably some of the hardest work you'll ever do while having some of the most fun you'll ever have. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.